Okay, one of the things that we're going to talk about while I'm out on Monday is Hellenistic Greece. This is the period of Alexander the Great. Alexander the Great is always one of the most important figures in history, and you don't just earn the title of the Great without having done something important. I told you guys in our last lecture that after the Peloponnesian War, after the Greek Civil War, that there was a time period of availability where someone who wanted to invade Greece could. Okay, and it won't be the Persians this time. It'll actually be someone from the north. It'll be the uh, the people from Macedonia. Okay, you look up here, you see Macedonia is right here. The Macedonians were a buffer state in a lot of ways. The Greeks down here kind of viewed the Macedonians, and rightfully so, as a bunch of barbarians. They never looked like they were going to amount to anything. They weren't very unified, and they were constantly really getting invaded. The Because they were constantly getting invaded, they were always fighting, which made them pretty good at it. But the Macedonians really didn't appear to be much of anything until we get to this guy. Okay. Philip II will rule Macedonia from 359 until 336, and it's Philip that unites Macedonia and makes it into a powerful, very powerful military machine. He will be responsible for conquering the Greeks. So Philip is going to take his army, and he is going to move down here and conquer the Greeks by 338 BC. So by 338 BC, he has done something that the Persians could never were able to do, and that is he has conquered the Greeks and unified it forcefully, of course. The Philip has a plan. All right, Philip isn't conquering the Greeks necessarily to just conquer them. Philip has a bigger plan in mind. What he wants to do is take that army and invade Persia. So he wants to fight the Persian wars in reverse. This time he wants the Greeks to invade Persia, and he needs the Greek resources and the Greek manpower to help him do so. So his goal really is to invade Persia. He never gets to see it happen. Philip will be assassinated and in 336 BC. And when he dies, the throne is going to pass to his relatively young son, Alexander, who is going to become Alexander the Great. So, kind of recap here what Philip wanted to do is take control of this area, which he does, and then use these resources essentially to invade the Persian Empire. And he probably would have been able to do it had he not been assassinated. Philip, though, leaves behind one of the most powerful armies that we have seen. Philip was a great innovator, and the really his son Alexander is, if you read the quote there, Alexander inherited from his father the most perfectly organized, trained, and equipped army of ancient times. This is one of the things that's going to allow Alexander to put his father's plan into action. So, young bold Alexander, who is just 20, is going to take this army and fulfill his father's dream of invading Persia. Alexander is something almost mystical. He had sort of been imbued with this belief that he was something special, that he was from the gods. And he has this tremendous army, but it's his leadership that really makes the army what it is. And even though he's only 20, he had been fighting with his father since he was a teenager. I mean, at the age of 16, he was fighting in the cavalry, invading Greece. So he's not an amateur. Okay, Alexander is ready to go. He is well trained in the military arts. He is very intelligent. He has been tutored by Aristotle, one of the great minds of the ancient world. So he is smart, he is cunning, and he's a tremendous leader and a tremendous warrior. Alexander is not going to lead from the back. Alexander is going to lead from the front. And when you watch the video about Alexander's victory at Gaugamela, then you'll see Alexander in action and what he was able to do. By the time that Alexander begins this quest to conquer Persia, over the next 10 years, you guys can see just from this list that all he's going to be able to conquer. Ionia, Anatolia, Syria, Palestine, Egypt, Mesopotamia, the Persian capital of Persepolis, India. Okay, so that list, you're like, big deal. But when you see it on the map, you suddenly realize that the Macedonians under Alexander are going to go from here all the way to here, and that's the border of India. Then along the way, they are going to conquer modern day Turkey, the modern day Middle East, Syria, these areas here, Egypt, Mesopotamia, Persia, Afghanistan, Pakistan, modern day Pakistan, all the way out to what is today modern day India. That's remarkable. Okay. And that happens in just 10 years. And it is the largest empire ever created in the Western world. And it's done so in 10 years by Alexander and his army. If I left you and dumped you out here and asked you to walk to the Indus River, it would probably take most of you 10 years. It is incredible what he is able to do. The reason Alexander has, like we said, one of the most well-trained, well-defined armies in the ancient world. The key is still the phalanx, something that we have already talked about and we already know. All right, there's some minor changes to it, but the phalanx is still the most important part of the infantry. But it's going to be coupled with other things, especially a cavalry. So the hoplite and the phalanx is still the kind of the backbone, and they still do, of course, a tremendous amount of the fighting. But the smart bomb, if you will, is Alexander's companion cavalry. The companions are the elite. Okay, they are his buddies. That's why they're called companions. And as you'll see in the video, these are the guys that knew Alexander as Alexander. They called him Alexander. They knew him. They grew up together. They are really the fast moving, they are the exploiters. So think of the phalanxes as an anvil, and think of the cavalry as the hammer. And you guys know that if you trap a piece of metal between a hammer and an anvil, you pound it. And that's what this idea is. Okay, it's to use the cavalry over here to block, is to use the phalanx to hold in position, and then Alexander is there to exploit the enemy's weakness and pound them into the phalanx. This is how he is able to move from Macedonia into these areas and begin to, for lack of better words, to lay waste to the Persian army. He'll defeat them at the Granicus River here. He will defeat them at Issus. He will push south, take control of Egypt, found Alexandria here, which is a pretty constant thing. He'll push back up and finally defeat the Persian King Darius here at Gaugamela, and push through, take Babylon, take Persepolis, where he's eventually named the new Persian king, and then he will push out into the Hindu Kush, all the way out here, and eventually out here to the Indus River. When his army revolts against him and says, "Look, we're tired. Can we go back home?" And that's why they turn south and head back home over here. Alexander militarily is able to do things that are just incredible. And the big question is not only was how was he able to do that, and but it's also what did he plan to do once he did it? And that's an even bigger question. Unfortunately, we don't know the answer to that because Alexander is going to die on us. He dies at a relatively young age in 323 or so. Alexander is dead in 323 and dies here in Babylon. We don't exactly know why. Probably from a fever, maybe from wounds. Some people say he drank too much and may have gotten some sort of something like pancreatitis, where you have infection plus problems with drink. So whatever the case, Alexander is dead in 323, and we don't really know how he planned. We have some ideas. Okay, when Alexander conquered this area, one of the things that he did is he divided it up into smaller places. All right, and then he had his soldiers marry Persian women. And so what we think he was going to do is fuse together Greek and Persian customs, and he was going to rule really as a super king somewhere here from Babylon. Greeks are going to follow Alexander out into these areas, and the Greek influence is going to spread out into these areas, and that's why we call it the Hellenic Kingdom, because the Hellenes are the Greeks. But once Alexander dies, the only real option is to divide it, and that's what's going to happen. This huge Alexandrian kingdom is going to be divided up among Alexander's generals. But once they move out here, they're going to unite parts, and Persian gold, silver is going to flow back into the Mediterranean world. This becomes an economic superpower. And the Greeks that move out here with it are going to bring Greek culture, Greek trade, and Greek ideas that are going to fuse together with the Persians, perhaps as Alexander intended. And you're going to see a huge amount of Greek influence into these areas. But after Alexander dies, essentially the kingdom is split into three parts. The homeland here is given to one of Alexander's generals, Antigonus, and so it becomes the Antigonid kingdom. The Ptolemy, one of his generals, takes control of the most economically prosperous area, and that's Egypt, and that becomes the Ptolemaic kingdom, as you can see here. And Seleucus takes control of Asia, essentially, and that becomes the Seleucid kingdom. None of these guys are Alexander, okay? And so this area is going to struggle without the unity that Alexander could have brought to this area. And of course, eventually it's going to be conquered by the Romans anyway, as we're going to talk about later on. But talking about Hellenistic influences, okay, there is certain things that you ought to kind of know about this area. As Alexander pushed out into these areas, Greek really civilization and Greek cities push out here as well. And you have this blending together of Greek ideas and Persian ideas. During this period of time, you have tremendous advances in Greek science. Okay, you can read about some of these, but Euclid, for example, the Greek Euclid will develop what we all know as basically plane geometry. So if you took geometry really in high school, you're talking about Euclidean geometry. Hipparchus talks about the stars. Aristarchus proposed a sun-centered universe, right? Hundreds and hundreds of years before that would even be contemplated in Europe. You have first steam engines. You have Archimedes, who develops essentially mathematical physics. You have a blending together of Greek and, in some cases, Persian and Asian religions into mystery cults, as they were called. There'll be some that come from Egypt. For example, a cult of Isis develops. The You have the cult of Cybele, which is a Asian mother goddess that was non-exclusive and popular and didn't sort of require any kind of faith. So there are all sorts of things that are going on, this blending together of Greek and Asian ideas. And you see it in the cities, you see Greek ideas. But don't forget, this area is super important because of the economy. Once this breaks up, even though it breaks up physically, the economic part of it is very important. You'll even see Hellenistic philosophies like Diogenes and Cynicism, all right, that the way to sort of self-importance was to avoid society, Epicureans who avoid pain and seek pleasure, and then even the Stoics, and which will be very important in Rome. Okay, and Stoics don't like emotion, so they tried to control their emotions. All of these things are blending together of Greek ideas and Asian ideas that will be important later on. All right, so I told you guys that this is important, and I'm going to also show you a video about Alexander's army that you'll get to see as well. Okay.